Reed Callahan bought Hollow Creek Ranch for $1, expecting nothing but silence and open land. But when he stepped inside, he heard footsteps upstairs and met Lena Harper, a woman hiding from the men who murdered her father. She carried proof that could destroy them, and they were already riding hard to take it back. By sundown, strangers would become allies, and a forgotten ranch would become the battleground where justice and survival would be decided. Reed Callahan never expected salvation to come wrapped in splintered wood and silence. The deed to the Hollow Creek Ranch was signed over to him for $1, an amount so absurd it felt like a joke. But Reed wasn't laughing. He was grieving, rebuilding, trying to outrun memories that clung to his boots like red dust. The ranch, a forgotten property just west of Tombstone, Arizona, offered what he needed most: space, solitude, and something to finally call his own. The land stretched out under the unforgiving afternoon sun like a promise waiting to be kept. Fences sagged, weeds whispered through cracked troughs, and the main house looked like it had been holding its breath for years. Reed had arrived alone, saddle-worn and silent, expecting to find emptiness. He got something else entirely. When he pushed open the warped front door, it resisted him like it remembered someone else's hand. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something more: curious warmth, the kind that shouldn't exist in a home abandoned by time. Then he heard it. Footsteps upstairs. Light, deliberate, human. Reed froze. Carter, the man who'd sold him the place, had looked him dead in the eye and promised, "Ain't nobody been out there in years. You'll have it all to yourself." Either Carter lied or someone forgot to leave. Reed kept one hand near the handle of his satchel, the other brushing the grip of his revolver as he slowly stepped into the foyer. Before he could call out, a voice did it for him. "You must be the new owner." At the top of the staircase stood a woman in her 20s, hair loose, expression unreadable. She wore a faded blouse and skirt, patched in places, sturdy in others. She didn't look scared. She looked like she'd been expecting him. Her voice didn't waver when she added, "My name's Lena Harper. I've been taking care of this place." Reed blinked, trying to reconcile the facts. A stranger, a woman, living here, unmentioned. Why? How his instincts stirred not in fear, but in something quieter: recognition. She reminded him of the look his mother used to wear when the crops failed, resolute, tired, still standing. "You're saying you live here?" he asked. "I've stayed here, yes. Since the winter 3 years ago. This land saved my life." She walked toward a window, drew back the curtain, and revealed the wide stretch of grassland swaying in the breeze. "I kept the roof patched, the fences from falling, the well running. I didn't expect anyone to come back, least of all with a deed in their hand." Reed followed her gaze. The land was old, but not dead. It had been cared for not by accident, but with intent. She turned to face him again, the sunlight hitting her features just right, revealing exhaustion carved by time and chased by something heavier. "There are things about this ranch Carter doesn't know," she said. "Things no one wants to talk about. And people who'd rather it stayed that way." Her words lodged in his chest like a splinter. Reed had spent 5 years saving for a place like this. Not for glory, not for a legacy, just peace. A place to set down roots and forget the pain of a marriage lost to sickness and silence. But now, staring at this woman who clearly didn't belong to any official record, he felt the earth shift beneath him. "What kind of things?" he asked. Lena's jaw tightened. "The kind that ride in pairs. The kind that don't knock. The kind that already took everything from me once and won't stop until they've taken it all again." And just like that, the ranch wasn't just property anymore. It was a battleground, a secret, a reckoning waiting to happen. Reed exhaled slowly, his grip on the brass doorknob loosening. He'd come here looking for a new beginning. But what he found was a woman clinging to the last piece of her past, and a future neither of them had seen coming. The silence inside Hollow Creek Ranch grew heavier after Lena's confession. Reed Callahan stood in the center of the dim parlor dust motes curling through shafts of sunlight that filtered between slatted blinds. The house, though aged and bruised by time, bore the quiet order of someone who still loved it. A broom leaned near the hearth. The mantel had been dusted. There was even a vase of dried wildflowers on the table, nothing fancy, just enough to say someone stayed. Lena Harper moved through the room like she belonged to it. Or maybe it belonged to her. She wasn't afraid, not exactly, but Reed could tell she'd been living with a kind of tension that sunk into your bones and made a home there. Every movement she made was measured, every breath half-held. She paused beside the fireplace, brushing her fingers along the edge of a carved wooden beam. "I used to think if I stayed quiet long enough they'd stop looking," she said. "But the thing about men like them, they never stop. They just circle farther out until they catch your scent again." Reed didn't ask who they were. Not yet. Instead, he set down his worn leather satchel near the hearth and sat on the edge of a chair that creaked under his weight. "Tell me," he said simply. Lena sat opposite him, the fading afternoon light catching the edges of her face. For a moment, she seemed unsure if she should trust him. But something in his posture, or maybe the exhaustion in his eyes, convinced her that he wasn't here to take anything from her. "My father's name was Samuel Harper," she began, voice low and even. "He was a miner, a good one. Not the kind to chase fool's gold or gamble away the claim. He worked these hills for near 10 years, mapped every inch of the ore veins west of Rust Creek Ridge. He kept records so detailed you could walk those tunnels in the dark and still strike the richest seam." Reed listened quietly, sensing the shift in her tone. It wasn't just storytelling, it was remembering, reclaiming. "He found something big," Lena continued. "Too big. A vein that could have made our family one of the wealthiest in Arizona territory. But instead of fortune, it brought men like the Crowley brothers. They owned the claim next ridge over, but they wanted what we had. They showed up one day with forged papers and a sheriff in their pocket. Said Pa owed them everything, the mine, the land, even our house. And nobody questioned it." Reed asked, disbelief creasing his brow. Lena's laugh was short and bitter. "Questioning gets you buried out here. They use their influence to shut us out of our own life. And when my father refused to leave the mine, they made sure it collapsed with him in it." The words landed like rocks in Reed's chest. He didn't speak. He just waited. "I was 16 when it happened," she said softly. "I tried to fight them. I went to every official I could find. No one listened. They said the Crowleys had documentation witnesses. Said my father was behind on taxes. All lies. But lies don't matter when the liars write the rules." She stood and crossed to a loose floorboard near the baseboard. With practiced ease, she pried it up and withdrew a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. "These are the originals," she said, unwrapping them to reveal a set of brittle papers. Survey maps hand-drawn. Notarized deeds, even geological assessments in her father's handwriting. Reed leaned forward, studying the intricate work. This is solid. You could win your claim back with this." "If I live long enough to hand it to a judge," she replied, "and if I find one who's not in their pocket." He nodded slowly. "So you ran." "Ran? No. I came home," she said almost defiantly. "This ranch used to belong to my uncle before he passed. It was left out of all the legal dealings, forgotten. So I came here, kept quiet, worked the land, and waited. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted time to think, to figure out what came next." Reed leaned back, exhaling through his nose. His mind reeled. He had come to this ranch expecting old fences and silence, not buried crimes and stolen claims. And yet he couldn't walk away. There was something about the way Lena looked when she spoke of her father, a quiet resolve. She wasn't asking for rescue. She never had. What she wanted, what she needed, was someone who wouldn't run. "You could have sold this," he said. "Gone east, started new." "I thought about it," she admitted. "But leaving wouldn't change what happened. And this land, it's the last piece of my father I've got left." There was a long pause, the kind that bends the air between two people. Reed stood and crossed to the window, gazing out at the horizon. The same land he'd bought for $1 was now something altogether different. Not just soil, not just fences. It was the anchor to someone's fight for truth. He turned back to her. "They'll come eventually. They always do," she said. "And when they do—" His voice trailed off. She looked up, her gaze steady. "Then I stop hiding." Reed stared at her then to the papers still spread across the table. For a man who had built walls around his heart after burying his wife, this moment felt dangerously close to something raw and real. "I didn't come here to get involved in someone else's war," he said, almost to himself. "I know," she replied, her voice quiet. "You should leave if you want to. I wouldn't blame you." He didn't respond. Instead, he picked up the deed, the one with his name on it, and folded it carefully before placing it back in his satchel. "Not yet," he said. "Let's see how deep this land really goes." And with that, the ranch had 2 guardians instead of 1. The wind had shifted by late afternoon, carrying with it a kind of stillness Reed Callahan didn't like. Out beyond the far pasture, a layer of dust began to rise, low and deliberate. Not the scatter of cattle, but the slow grind of riders approaching. He stepped out onto the porch, hand shielding his eyes against the slanting sun, and spotted 3 figures on horseback, cresting the southern trail. Too far off to make out their faces, but their posture was clear, upright, calculated, armed. Inside the house, Lena Harper went rigid the moment he told her. She didn't have to look. She already knew. She moved to the fireplace in 3 silent strides, retrieving the cloth-wrapped bundle of documents and slipping it behind a loose board in the kitchen wall, one she'd reinforced with a false back weeks ago. "They found me," she said, voice flat. "No drama, just certainty." Reed's pulse quickened. "You sure third man rides like Silas Boone?" she replied. "Used to be the Crowley's tracker. Never rushed, always thorough." Boone. That name triggered something in Reed, an old newspaper article he'd once read in a Tucson boarding house about a bounty hunter gone rogue. Silas Boone was the kind of man who moved like water around obstacles. If he was part of this trio, they weren't here to talk. Reed tightened the straps on his holster. "They coming to talk or to take?" "They don't distinguish the two," Lena muttered, moving to the front room to check the window's line of sight. "We won't have long." As the riders drew closer, details sharpened. The man at the lead was unmistakably Clyde Maddox, square-jawed, broad-chested, and dressed in a long brown duster that fluttered like a vulture's wings in the wind. His eyes scanned the property with the cold efficiency of someone surveying meat on a butcher's hook. Silas Boone rode to his right rifle, resting easy across his lap. The third man, young nervous, trailed behind, glancing at every shadow like he knew exactly what could be hiding in it. Reed watched from the porch, arms crossed, but body coiled. The men halted about 40 yards out, far enough to suggest caution, close enough to show confidence. Reed took a slow step forward. "Afternoon," he called, keeping his voice even. Clyde Maddox dismounted, brushing dust from his coat. "Afternoon," he returned, walking forward like a man who owned the land. "This here Hollow Creek Ranch." "According to the deed in my satchel," Reed replied. "That's so." Clyde grinned. "Funny. Didn't figure this place would sell so quick, or so cheap. Sometimes a man gets lucky." Clyde's smile didn't reach his eyes. I've always believed luck runs out faster in these parts. Reed let the words hang between them, feeling the weight of what wasn't said. We're looking for someone, Clyde said, stepping onto the first porch stair without invitation. Young woman, dark hair. 'Bout yay high, name's Lena Harper. Heard she's been squatting on this property for a while. She's not here, Reed answered carefully, not looking back toward the door. Silas Boone raised an eyebrow from the saddle. You sure about that? Reed shrugged. Been here all of 6 hours myself. If there's ghosts, they haven't introduced themselves. Clyde's boot tapped the stair rail. Let's not play games, mister, Callahan, Reed said. Reed Callahan. Well, Mr. Callahan, Clyde drawled, you may not know what you stepped into, but let me make it real simple. That woman's in possession of stolen property maps and deeds that don't belong to her. We're here to take 'em back, that's all. Reed didn't flinch. You got a warrant? No, but we got urgency, Clyde said, and his smile turned sharp. And in my experience, urgency has a way of skipping over paperwork. Inside the house, Lena stood just beyond the doorframe, breath held tight in her chest. She could hear everything, and every word pulled a little more air out of the room. She knew how this went. She'd seen it before, first the questions, then the threats, then the fire. She moved fast. In the kitchen, she grabbed the second bundle, a decoy wrapped in the same oiled cloth as the real documents, and slipped it into a hidden compartment under the woodpile. It wouldn't fool them long, but maybe long enough. Then, against every instinct screaming to stay hidden, she stepped out onto the porch. Clyde, she said. All three men turned. Clyde's face lit with something like satisfaction. There she is. Lena stepped up beside Reed. Let him go, she said firmly. He's got nothing to do with this. Clyde cocked his head. That's so funny, you always did have a way of dragging people into your messes. He just bought this place this morning, she said. Didn't even know I existed until he walked through the front door. Reed didn't move, didn't speak, just stood beside her, arms loose at his sides, but body ready. Clyde glanced back at Silas. She always was a talker. Boone said nothing, just watched, eyes calculating. I'll go with you, Lena continued quietly. No fight, no tricks. Just let him stay here. Let this be over. No, Reed said suddenly, voice sharp. This is my land now, and nobody takes anyone off it without showing the law. Clyde's smile vanished. You think this is about law? I think this is about theft, Reed replied. And if I'm going to be part of this mess, I'm going to be real sure who's stealing from who. The tension cracked like ice. Silas Boone moved a hand toward his rifle. The young rider shifted nervously, and then far off came the sound that changed everything. Hoofbeats. Fast. Several. Clyde's eyes flicked to the horizon. A dust cloud was rising from the east, where the trail curved down from Granite Hollow. Company Silas said, already turning in his saddle. Reed recognized the glint of badges before he recognized the riders themselves. 6, maybe 7, cutting fast through the grasslands. One of them raised a rifle skyward and fired once, loud, sharp, deliberate. Sheriff Lena whispered. Clyde cursed under his breath and backed off the step. This ain't over, he snarled. Not by a long shot. Reed didn't answer. He just stood still as the posse rode in the sun, falling behind them like justice descending on wings of dust. The rumble of hoofbeats grew louder, the kind of sound that swallowed breath and turned muscles to stone. Lena Harper stood motionless on the porch, her jaw set, but Reed Callahan could see her hands clenched tight at her sides. The last time horsemen had come barreling down a ridge, they brought ruin. But this time was different. The riders moved in formation, their silhouettes cutting sharp against the orange-washed sky. 7 men, dust-streaked and focused, rode with urgency, but not panic. The lead horse carried a lean man in a black vest and badge pinned to his chest that caught the last of the sunlight like a flare of steel. He rode straight reins loose, but confident, the kind of posture that told you he'd seen his fair share of bad men and wasn't impressed by any of them. "That's Sheriff Tom Granger," Reed murmured to Lena without turning his head. "Looks like someone sent word. Maybe someone still believes in the law," she whispered, though her voice held more wonder than certainty. The sheriff pulled his horse to a halt 20 feet out. The others fanned out behind him like spokes on a wagon wheel calculated, trained, ready. The circle of law closed in. Clyde Maddox stiffened. The bravado that had oozed from him earlier now sat unevenly on his shoulders like a coat too tight in the heat. Silas Boone, still mounted, shifted in his saddle but kept his rifle across his lap. The young rider, Emmett, looked like he was trying to disappear into his collar. "Step away from them," Maddox, Sheriff Granger called, voice steady, slow. "Drop your weapons and maybe we all walk out of here." Clyde didn't move. "We've got business with the girl. Doesn't concern you." "Girl's name is Lena Harper," the sheriff said plainly, dismounting. "And the business you've got with her is about to get real public real fast." Reed didn't breathe. Neither did Lena. Every second stretched like fence wire on the verge of snapping. Sheriff Granger pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and held it aloft. "This here is a warrant for the arrest of Clyde Maddox, signed by a judge in Pinal County, backed by testimony from one Hank Ledger used to mine just west of Hollow Creek. Claims he saw you and your boys tampering with the support beams in Samuel Harper's mine. Says you knew damn well when Samuel would be underground." The effect was instant. Lena gasped. Her legs buckled and she grabbed the porch railing like the earth had tilted beneath her. "You mean someone saw?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Sheriff Granger nodded without taking his eyes off Maddox. "Old Hank's been hiding out in the canyons for 3 years. Came forward last week when he heard the Crowley boys were sniffing around again. Said he couldn't carry the guilt anymore." Clyde barked a bitter laugh, though it didn't sound convincing. "That old drunk. He couldn't find his boots without help. You call that a witness?" "We call that probable cause," Granger said calmly, signaling to one of his deputies to move wide. "And when we match his account with the original deed your boys were so desperate to destroy, that's enough to bring charges all the way to Tucson." Silas Boone shifted. "They don't pay us enough for this," he muttered. "No," Granger said, eyes locked on him. "They don't. But if you lower your weapons right now, I might just believe you're smarter than you look." Reed caught movement out of the corner of his eye. Emmett Royce, the youngest of the riders, suddenly veered his horse to the side and bolted, dust exploding behind him like smoke from a gun barrel. No one chased. Granger didn't even flinch. "One down," he muttered. Clyde's fingers twitched. His revolver was still holstered, but just barely. Reed saw the desperation building in the man's eyes, not anger anymore, but panic. He was cornered, and cornered men made mistakes. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," Clyde warned, voice shaking. "You don't know what you're stepping into." "Maybe not," Granger replied. "But I know what it looks like when a man tries to cover up murder by burning a woman off her own land." Behind them, the horizon burned amber, the last light of day bleeding into night. Reed could feel every breath, every heartbeat like a drum in his chest. He didn't know Sheriff Granger, but he believed him. And right now he was the only thing standing between justice and another silent burial. Lena Granger said gently, "I need you to confirm something. Do you still have the original documents your father kept?" She swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes." "Hidden in the house." "Good," he said, never looking away from Maddox. "Those will be evidence in a murder trial. Maybe 3. Clyde took one last shot with his voice. "You think arresting me solves this? The Crowleys won't stop. You haul me away, they'll send 10 more. She'll never be safe." Reed stepped forward. Maybe not, but she won't be alone. Lena turned toward him, eyes wide. It was the first time he'd said anything like that aloud. A promise made not with flowers, but with fire. Clyde saw it too, and in that moment, whatever patience he had left shattered. With a furious snarl, he went for his gun. But Reed had already moved. He dove off the porch as Granger's deputies reacted like clockwork. 2 gunshots rang out clean and final. Clyde Maddox dropped to the dirt before he even cleared his holster. The world fell quiet again. Just the wind, just the dust, and the end of a man who'd made his living taking what didn't belong to him. Reed picked himself up from behind the water trough, brushing splinters from his jacket. Sheriff Granger holstered his weapon and gave a single nod. "It's over," he said. Lena stepped off the porch and looked down at the body of the man who'd haunted her dreams for years. Not with triumph, not with vengeance. Just relief. "I never thought anyone would believe me," she whispered. "They will now," the sheriff replied. "We'll ride into Tucson together. I'll make sure of it." Reed looked at her, then not the woman who'd hidden in shadows, but the one now stepping into the light. It wasn't just justice that had arrived. It was proof that sometimes when the world turns its back, the right people still show up. The sun dipped low behind the ridges of Hollow Creek, painting the sky in shades of rust and violet. The wind had gone still, as if the land itself were catching its breath after the chaos. Clyde Maddox's body had been loaded onto a wagon by the sheriff's men, draped with a tarp and flanked by Silence. Silas Boone surrendered quietly, shackled and stony-faced, while Emmett Royce was still just a dust trail vanishing toward nowhere. Lena Harper stood near the porch steps, arms folded across her chest, her eyes not on the body, but on the open field beyond it. It was over, at least this part of it. Sheriff Tom Granger approached with the slow, steady gait of a man who'd seen too many endings like this one. "Miss Harper," he said gently, "you sure about showing up in court? It won't be easy. There'll be folks who won't like what you have to say." "I've waited 3 years to say it anyway," Lena replied, her voice steady but quiet. "My father deserves the truth even if I have to say it alone." "You won't be alone," Reed Callahan said from the porch, stepping down beside her. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It always did when it mattered. The sheriff nodded. "We'll be back in 5 days. Papers assigned, statements collected. Those documents of your father's official now. You're the legal heir to the Harper claim, and if things go the way I think they will, the Crowley operation won't survive the month." Lena only nodded, though the weight in her shoulders seemed to ease, if only slightly. Sheriff Granger tipped his hat, then turned to mount his horse. One by one, the riders filed out, the sound of hooves fading with the setting sun, until only Reed and Lena remained the quiet, folding around them like a wool blanket. For the first time in days, maybe years, there was no one chasing her. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "They're really gone," she said. "For now," Reed replied. "The Crowleys might send more, but that's a fight for another day." Lena nodded. "I don't know what comes next." Reed glanced around at the ranch. The grass still needed cutting. The corral gate still hung crooked. One of the fence posts out near the southern boundary had snapped clean in 2 from rot, but the bones of the place were good. It just needed someone willing to stay. "Maybe you don't need to know yet," he said softly. "Maybe it's enough to just be still for a while." Lena turned to him. "Is that what you came here for? To be still?" He chuckled. "I came to disappear, if I'm being honest. Thought maybe I'd outwork the silence. Patch fences, tend cattle, sleep under a sky that doesn't ask questions. And now?" He looked at her, really looked at the strength in her spine, the grit in her eyes, the soft tremble in her fingers that hadn't quite let go of the fear. And yet she stood. She had stood through every storm, every theft, every buried truth. She'd fought for something everyone told her was gone. He admired that, more than he knew how to say. Now, he said, I'm thinking disappearing was never what I needed, just a reason to start again. She smiled faintly and turned back toward the open land. The wind picked up again, cool and steady, carrying the smell of sage and sun-dried dirt. You know, she said, I thought I'd have to leave once this was over. Figured this place would belong to someone else by now. It does, he replied. Technically. She raised an eyebrow. Technically, Reed shrugged. I bought a ranch. Paid $1. Didn't know it came with a caretaker or a history or a fight I'd have to stand in. But now that I've been here. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Lena's voice softened. It's your name on the deed, and yours on the legacy, he said. We can fight about it in court or... He paused, meeting her gaze. Or we can call it even partners. The word lingered between them. She studied him not as a stranger now, but as a man who had chosen to stay, who had stood on a porch with a gun to his head and still refused to give her up, who had offered protection not out of obligation, but out of something steadier, something earned. Partners. She echoed, a slow smile forming. Is that a business arrangement or something else? Let's start with business, he said. See where it takes us. They shook hands on it. No promises, no expectations. Just two people anchoring themselves to something that might, if nurtured, become more. As twilight deepened, they walked the edge of the property together. Lena pointed out where her father used to test soil for gold content. Reed showed her where the roof needed mending. Their conversation was easy, unforced. Two lives once broken, beginning to knit themselves into a shared rhythm. They stopped near the edge of the creek, where willow trees bent low and the first stars blinked awake overhead. I used to come here when I needed to remember who I was, Lena said, crouching to run her hand through the cool water. Reed sat beside her. And now, she looked up at him, not with fear, not even with caution, just quiet hope. Now I think I get to decide who I want to be. He nodded. And I get to build something worth staying for. They stayed there for a long time, long after the dark took the sky and the ranch lights glowed warm behind them, not as fugitives or victims or people with nowhere left to run, but as two survivors who had chosen to stand, together. Whatever came next, more riders' courtrooms, repairs, they would meet it as partners, with clear eyes and calloused hands, with grit, with patience, and maybe someday with love. But tonight, all that mattered was that the land had room for both of them, and that for the first time in a very long time, neither one of them was alone. The stars came out slowly that night, flickering into view one by one, as if the sky was learning how to breathe again. Hollow Creek Ranch, once an abandoned patch of dust and forgotten history, now pulsed with a quiet promise. The house stood still, no longer waiting for someone to come home, but holding space for two souls who had finally stopped running. Inside, the fire crackled low, throwing soft light against the wooden walls that had witnessed years of silence. Now those walls held voices again. Laughter, footsteps, plans being made in the still hours between sunset and dawn. Reed Callahan sat at the edge of the porch boots, planted firm on the boards he planned to fix come morning. Lena Harper rested beside him, knees pulled to her chest, shoulders draped in a blanket he'd fetched without being asked. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. There was a kind of understanding between them now that didn't require explanations or promises, just presence, just choice. The land stretched ahead of them in hushed tones touched by starlight and memory. Somewhere beyond those hills, trouble might still stir. The Crowley brothers weren't gone for good, and justice had a way of leaving unfinished edges. But Lena no longer flinched at every gust of wind, and Reed no longer looked at the road like it owed him an escape. What they had now wasn't built on adrenaline or desperation. It was rooted in something steadier, trust earned in the fire, truth told through actions, and the shared burden of survival. Lena, once a shadow flickering behind boarded windows, now stepped fully into the light. And Reed, the man who had come to disappear, had finally been seen not as a broken remnant of his past, but as someone capable of choosing a future. In town, the sheriff had filed the charges. A court date was set. The documents her father had once guarded with his life were now in the hands of people who would speak for the dead and for the daughter who refused to let his name be erased. For the first time, Lena would walk into a courtroom not to plead, but to testify, not as a fugitive, but as the rightful heir of a legacy buried too long. But all that was tomorrow. Tonight, there was only the ranch, the soft creak of wood settling, the wind whispering through the tall grass, the scent of sage and pine rising from the earth like incense. Reed passed her a mug of warm coffee, and when their fingers brushed, neither pulled away. "This place still feels too big for one person," she said quietly. He looked at her with the ghost of a smile. "Good thing you're not one person anymore." She leaned into his shoulder, not because she needed protection, but because she finally allowed herself to be held. And he let her, not as a savior, not as a man claiming what wasn't his, but as a partner standing beside someone who had done more than just survive. Together they'd rebuild the barn, mend the fences, plant seed and stake claim not just to the land, but to the lives they were quietly choosing to build side by side. No declarations, no guarantees. Just the slow, steady labor of two people willing to stay. And as the stars deepened above them, the old ranch didn't feel like a refuge anymore. It felt like home. If this story stirred something in you, hope, courage, or the quiet strength to keep going, subscribe to Whispers of the West. We bring you powerful tales of redemption, resilience, and frontier grit every week. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment. Your support helps us keep these stories alive for hearts that still believe.